Royal Romances, Empress Alexandra and Mystic Rasputin. Part 2, The Miracle and the Curse. After giving birth to 4 daughters and becoming the object of ridicule and disparagement, Empress Alexandra finally fulfilled her duty and gave her husband, Russian Emperor Nicholas II, an heir. The baby boy, Alexei, was supposed to be the future of the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty. Instead, he became its end. The child, whom the proud parents called our treasure and sunbeam, was born with hemophilia, a deadly inherited disorder which did not let the blood coagulate. Hemophiliacs like little Alexei could bleed to death from the tiniest scratch or bump. Russians only had vague knowledge about the disease, but Alexandra witnessed its fatal consequences more than once. Hemophilia had already taken her uncle, her 2-year-old brother, and her young nephew. The illness originated with her grandmother, Queen Victoria, who passed it to Alexandra's mother, who then passed it to her children. Now here was the problem. Women with the defective gene usually did not exhibit any symptoms, but their sons were likely to get sick and die an early and painful death. Alexandra knew that the disease was incurable and only a miracle could keep her son alive. Perhaps instead of praying that God spare her child from this hereditary illness, Alexandra should have consulted with doctors. Yet the royal couple never sought medical advice. A prominent British geneticist wrote, "If a distinguished doctor outside court circles had desired to warn Nicholas of the dangerous character of his approaching marriage, I do not believe that he would have been able to do so, either directly or in the press. Kings are carefully protected against disagreeable realities. The hemophilia of the heir was a symptom of the divorce between royalty and reality." This was a very astute observation. At first, the royal couple was in denial about their son's condition. When the newborn began to hemorrhage from the navel stump, Alexandra blamed the midwife for swaddling him too tight. When the bleeding stopped, the parents hoped that it would not happen again. It was easy to be fooled. Baby Alexei was a picture of health. Chubby, robust, with blue eyes and golden curls, he looked like a miniature warrior. When the child was young, it was fairly easy to protect him. Alexandra took the heir on carriage rides and was tickled pink when people smiled and bowed upon seeing him. Nicholas brought Alexei for the review of the troops, and the boy delighted everyone when he burst into laughter as the soldiers greeted him with a vociferous hurrah. But as the heir began to crawl and walk, his safety quickly became an issue. Superficial cuts and scratches, even if they bled profusely, were usually treated with tight bandages, which staunched the blood flow. Much more dangerous and deadly were the bruises that could not be seen. Innocent tumbles and falls led to blood seeping into the child's joints, locking them and making them horrendously painful. Alexei cried for his mother and begged for help. Alexandra stayed by her son's bedside day and night. Sometimes his screams were so loud, servants had to plug their ears with cotton. Doctors were very limited in what they could do. Ice did not bring much relief. There was morphine, but the couple was against it because of the drug's addictive qualities. Sometimes Alexei fainted, and the unconsciousness gave him a short respite from his sufferings. Riddled with grief and guilt, Alexandra prayed constantly. Did she ask God for his pain to stop? For a healer, perhaps? Someone like Master Philippe. What a pity he had died recently. Little did the Empress know that the savior she had prayed for was already on his way. His name was Grigory Rasputin. There is hardly a person who has not heard his name. The royal couple called Rasputin a man of God. Others believed he was the devil incarnate. Who was right? We shall not repeat endless lies and myths about him here. They are sensational, but also senseless. Instead, let us follow Rasputin's path from his Siberian village to the imperial palace in St. Petersburg. How on earth did he, a simple peasant, get there? When Grigory was little, he was a sensitive and sickly child, a poor sleeper and a bedwetter. Not an easy start for any youngster, especially one born more than a century ago in Siberia. But unlike his older siblings, Grigory survived. His youth was no different from that of any other Siberian boy. He grew up, married, had children, worked the fields, served as a coachman, fished, drank, and brawled. No surprises here. But at the age of 28, something happened that made Rasputin set down his plow, leave his family, and set off on a pilgrimage. What could have caused such a drastic change in his life? Some said Grigory was lazy and was running away from hard work. Some said he met a traveling monk who set him on a new path. And one neighbor alleged that he struck Grigory on the head for stealing a pole from his fence. The blow knocked Grigory out and made him abandon his old ways. Is there any truth to any of these claims? There is no answer to this question. What we do know is that Rasputin started on a journey that would help him connect with God. His quest took him to monasteries, churches, and sacred places, all the way to Jerusalem. Pilgrimage was not an unusual way of life in those days in Russia. About 1 million pilgrims wandered the vast empire. Some, like Rasputin, sought enlightenment. Some were running away from trouble. Some were looking for trouble. And many just had no place to go. My friends, travel by foot in those days was nothing like today's hiking. No cell phones, no GPS, no well-padded shoes, and no foldable tents. Pilgrims usually carried a staff and a canvas knapsack. What was in the knapsack? A mug to scoop water from streams, relics from holy places, and maybe some simple provisions like a boiled potato. Grigory often covered 30 miles a day despite the weather. He begged for alms, did odd jobs, and often went for days without food. To mortify his flesh and quench unholy desires, he wore fetters and did not change clothes for months on end. He was chased by wolves and attacked by road agents. "Nothing's mine, it's all from God," he said to the robbers. "I am glad to give you everything I have." Grigory quickly discovered that he did not want to become a monk. Monasteries, he said, were infected with vice. Besides, they had too many restrictions. He preferred to seek salvation in the real world. The pilgrimage transformed Rasputin. He gave up smoking and drinking and became a vegetarian. To better understand the Gospels, he taught himself to read and write. My friends, think about it. For an adult Siberian peasant 100 years ago, to become literate was nothing short of a miracle. Grigory engaged in conversations with church elders, and he himself began to teach. When he sought shelter for the night, and in those days it was considered an honor to receive pilgrims, Grigory prayed with his hosts and for his hosts. The way he said his prayers mesmerized even the clergy. Monk Benjamin remembered. His speech was always very witty. I'd say Rasputin had an extraordinary mind and religious fervor. You should have seen how he prayed in the cathedral. He stood taut like an arrow with his face turned toward the sky. Then, with great speed, he would start crossing himself and bowing all the way to the ground. When Grigory finally returned home, his wife did not recognize him. Her husband's once clean-shaven face was covered with a scraggly beard, and he was dressed in rags. Rasputin no longer went to church. Services were held in Old Slavonic, a language no longer spoken. Priests mumbled and rumbled, and Grigory received no enlightenment for his heart or soul. This is what he wrote. It suddenly dawned on me that the Lord had not chosen royal chambers for himself, but a humble manger. An unworthy wretch, I dug out a small cave in the stables, something like a grave, and I went and prayed there. Grigory stayed in the village to help with the crops and then disappeared again, leaving his parents, wife, and 3 children to fend for themselves. Gradually, he came to develop a reputation of a holy man who could heal with prayer and foresee the future. He was not even 40, but people began to address him as an elder. The title indicated that he was regarded as a spiritual and religious guide. The clergy, too, recognized Grigory's religious zeal and his ability to see right into a person's soul. Unlike the monotonous church services, Rasputin offered people passion and compassion. This is what Monk Benjamin wrote about the state of religion in those days. We have ceased to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We have become indifferent, and suddenly a flaming torch appears among us. After 8 years of pilgrimage, furnished with letters of recommendation and with his reputation of a holy man preceding him, Rasputin entered St. Petersburg, the Russian capital. There, he was received by the highest-ranking clergy. One of them was Father Feofan, a former confessor of the imperial couple and a good friend of the Montenegrin princesses Milica and Stana. Remember them from our previous episode? They were the 2 sisters who introduced Master Philippe to the royals. Rasputin was their latest protege. In 1905, when Alexei was 14 months old, Nicholas noted in his diary, "We had tea with Milica and Stana. We got acquainted with a man of God, Grigory, from the Tobolsk region." Since Master Philippe's departure, the royal couple had met with numerous so-called people of God. There was Matrona the Barefoot, who traveled shoeless from one holy place to another. There was the clairvoyant healer Mitya, an epileptic who had a translator interpret his grunts. And there were many others, some quite unruly and unpredictable. Perhaps church officials hoped that Rasputin would become their representative at the palace. They quickly realized that Grigory was too ambitious to serve as their pawn. Once he settled in St. Petersburg, Rasputin quickly became popular among the elite, especially the ladies. The city was full of well-educated, smart women who had no outlets for their inspirations and talents. Their husbands cheated on them with young actresses and pretty ballerinas. Their children were brought up by governesses, and their social lives were circumvented by Empress Alexandra, who moved out of the capital and lived in her suburban palaces. There were no more balls or royal receptions where hybrid ladies showed off their beautiful gowns and exquisite jewelry, where they danced and gossiped, picked future husbands for their daughters, and had an opportunity to see and be seen. No one knew that the imperial couple moved away from everyone's eyes to better guard their dreadful secret, Alexei's hemophilia. A weak heir meant a weak throne. Nicholas and Alexandra would not let anyone doubt the strength of their rule. Meanwhile, St. Petersburg had turned into a powder keg. Nicholas had suffered a humiliating loss in his very unpopular war with Japan. The defeat led to widespread unrest. When a peaceful demonstration of workers approached the Winter Palace, imperial troops fired on them, killing and injuring hundreds of innocent people, including women and children. Though the emperor was not in the capital, he was blamed for this massacre, which became known as Bloody Sunday. Under immense pressure, Nicholas was forced to make allowances for a parliament and grant some civil liberties. The move upset him greatly. The emperor believed that his power came from God, and he detested sharing it with his subjects. Faced with political turmoil, with a sick child on her hands, the self-exiled empress was a nervous wreck. Alexandra did not trust anyone, even members of her immediate family, and had but one real friend, her young lady-in-waiting, Anna Vorobova. Numerous healers who visited the palace had brought no relief to the empress or the heir. In the meantime, in St. Petersburg, Rasputin had become widely known as a healer and a spiritual guide. There are many stories about the miraculous recoveries of his patients, but I think one is especially indicative of Rasputin's power of faith and his ability to look into a person's heart. Grigory saw a certain Mrs. Berlanska. She had left her cheating husband, who then committed suicide. The tragedy left the widow paralyzed with guilt. I could not sleep or eat. I walked around without realizing what I was wearing. I got to the point where I couldn't stand in church because singing made me faint. I was always alone, without a smile, with a heavy stone on my heart. A friend suggested that I meet a man who knew how to calm the soul and plumb the secrets of the heart. He put his hand on the crown of my head and said, "One of the Lord's disciples hanged himself, and he did not stop it. Do you think that you are mightier than God?" His words were said with such decisiveness, they lifted my grief. In a short time, Rasputin had developed a substantial circle of female fans, some of whom even traveled with him to his home in Siberia. Grand Duchess Militsa presented Grigory with a generous sum of money, which allowed him to buy a spacious two-story house in his village. He gave the rest to the local church and the poor. Almost a year after first meeting the royal couple, Rasputin brought them a religious icon from Siberia. The empress loved icons and had rows and rows of them hanging on the walls of her private rooms. During this visit, she and Nicholas introduced Grigory to their children and spent an hour conversing with him. Let us mention that Nicholas allowed his ministers 15-20 minutes for their reports. 15 minutes with ministers and an entire hour with the holy man. What did the two talk about? Well, about God, of course. Grigory told beautiful, poetic stories about the saints and about his pilgrimages, and what was very important, he assured Nicholas that simple people, peasants, laborers, loved their monarch. Rasputin's words were balm for the emperor's soul. Nicholas ruled the Russian people, but he had no idea what they were about. He lived in palaces and was surrounded by ministers and conniving relatives who told him what to do and constantly asked for favors. And here was Grigory, who asked for nothing but the benevolence of His Majesty. Alexandra was even more taken by the holy man. Eventually, Rasputin became not just her spiritual guide, but, let's use a modern term, her therapist. He listened to Alexandra's sorrows and calmed her fears about the heir and the throne. It was no wonder that Grigory became a welcome guest at the palace. Just as they had done with Master Philippe, the imperial couple began to call Rasputin our friend. Nicholas and Alexandra wanted people in their inner circle to appreciate Grigory as much as they did. The emperor's sister Olga, who met the elder, admired how gentle he was with the children and how sincerely he prayed with them. And yet she wrote, "Unfortunately, I could never bring myself to like him. Rasputin began plying me with the most impertinent questions. Was I happy? Did I love my husband? Why didn't I have any children? He had no right to ask such questions, nor did I answer them. I was relieved at leaving the palace that evening." Olga's dislike of Rasputin places her in the camp of his skeptics and makes her a trustworthy witness when it comes to Grigory's power of healing. Shortly after Olga met Rasputin, Alexei, who was almost 3, fell and hurt his leg, she remembered. The poor child lay in such pain, dark patches under his eyes and his little body all distorted, and the leg terribly swollen. The doctors were useless. They looked more frightened than any of us and kept whispering among themselves. There seemed just nothing they could do, and hours went by until they had given up all hope. In her despair, late at night, Alexandra sent for Rasputin, who arrived as fast as he could. The next morning, Olga wrote, "The little boy was not just alive, but well. He was sitting up in bed, the fever gone, the eyes clear and bright, not a sign of any swelling in his leg. Later I learned that Rasputin had not even touched the child, but merely stood at the foot of his bed and prayed." Grand Duchess Olga recalled this incident long after its participants were dead. Did she have any reason to make up a story like this? Was she trying to show that her late brother and sister-in-law were not imagining Rasputin's healing power? Olga was firm about her statement. Some people would at once have it that Rasputin's prayers were simply coincidental with my nephew's recovery. In the first place, any doctor would tell you that an attack of such severity cannot be cured within a bare few hours. Secondly, the coincidence might have answered if it occurred, say, once or twice, but I could not even count how many times it happened. Another incident, and this one was recorded by numerous witnesses, took place at a Polish hunting lodge when Alexei was 8. The heir had hurt himself when jumping into a boat. He seemed fine at first, but in a couple of weeks, while riding in a carriage with his mother and her friend Anna, Alexei began to cry out in pain. They immediately went back. This is what Anna remembered. That ride stands out in my mind as an experience of horror. Every movement of the carriage, every rough place in the road was an unbearable, horrible torture for the child. By the time we reached home, he was almost unconscious with pain. The next weeks were nothing but torment for him and for all of us who had to listen to his continuous cries of pain. For 11 days, those dreadful sounds filled the corridor outside his room. Those of us who were nearby had to cover our ears to go about our duties. Hour after hour, the Empress kept vigil at her son's bed. The half-conscious child lay huddled on one side, his left leg drawn up so sharply that for nearly a year afterwards he could not straighten it out. His face was bloodless, his eyes rolled back in his head. When the Emperor saw his child in such agony, he burst into tears. Both parents felt that Alexei was dying. In a rare moment of consciousness, he said to his mother, "When I am dead, build me a little monument of stones in the woods." Alexei's condition was so severe, the royal office issued bulletins of his illness, though hemophilia was never mentioned. The reports stated abdominal hemorrhage and hematomas. As the heir's condition worsened, the office prepared a death bulletin, and a priest came to give him the last rites. Alexandra was desolate, but still hoped God would not abandon them. She told Anna to telegraph Rasputin, who was back in his village, and asked him to pray for Alexei. Grigory telegraphed back, "The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him." The next day, Alexei stopped bleeding. My friends, you probably yearn for a logical explanation. So do I. Unfortunately, there isn't one, or perhaps there are too many. Do you believe in medicine and doctors? Some suggest that when physicians stopped prodding Alexei and did not give him a drug similar to aspirin, the child's blood was able to coagulate and form a clot. If you believe in God and the power of prayer, then here is your chance to marvel at a true miracle. Think about it. The heir was on the brink of death, but 2,000 miles away in Siberia, a lowly peasant went against all odds and assured the Empress that her son would live. Rasputin was taking a tremendous risk. It would have made more sense for him to utter something vague like, "He's in God's hands now." That would have covered any outcome. But Grigory did not hide behind ambiguous predictions. What was Alexandra to think after witnessing her son's miraculous recovery? The Empress was now absolutely certain that Rasputin had been sent by God to protect her son. People who disagreed instantly became her mortal enemies. Unfortunately, most people did disagree. Why? Because the royals remained hush about their son's hemophilia. Alexei's condition had become a state secret. Those who were not a part of the family's very tight inner circle could never figure out why Rasputin was so welcome at the palace. The clergy envied Grigory his access to the emperor, and the ministers were upset because the monarch would not see them but had all the time in the world for this so-called holy man. The government, the church, the aristocracy, and the Romanov extended family believed that Rasputin had hypnotized the royal couple and was de facto running the empire. Gossip had it that the Empress was Rasputin's lover and even took him to her daughter's bedrooms. Unfortunately, Rasputin's behavior contributed to rumors like these. Upon learning that he was close to the imperial family, every morning numerous petitioners lined up before his apartment door. Many brought offerings of alcohol, food, and money to thank Grigory for his efforts in procuring them a job or helping with a promotion. Grigory would scrawl short notes and ask an official to help this or that person. When it came to money, he instantly gave it away. Poor widows, mothers with sick children, cripples, they could all count on his generosity. Alcohol was another story. Rasputin had taken to the bottle. Police began delivering reports to the palace. Rasputin got drunk at a Moscow restaurant and exposed himself. He was 3 sheets to the wind and urinated on a church. He spent time with prostitutes. He called the monarchs Papa and Mama and boasted that the old girl, that is Empress Alexandra, embroidered his shirt and belt. The latter was true, but Rasputin's loose tongue was causing more damage to the already tarnished image of the royals. The Prime Minister suggested that the Emperor remove Rasputin from St. Petersburg. Nicholas famously replied, "Better 10 Rasputins than one of the Empress's hysterical fits." Rumors intensified when in 1914, Nicholas decided that Russia would join World War I to fight with France and Britain against Germany. Gossip instantly turned Empress Alexandra into a German spy who fed the enemy Russia's military plans. The emperor was alleged to be no better than his wretched wife. He blindly followed Rasputin's orders and was nothing but a marionette in this unholy ménage à trois. Interestingly, Rasputin had been adamantly against Russia's participation in the war. Had Nicholas listened to him, perhaps he and his empire would have survived. The Russian army was outdated and poorly equipped. During the first year of the war, 1.5 million of its soldiers were dead, injured, or captured. Peasants who were sent to the battlefield could not understand whom and why they were fighting. There had been no attack on Russia's territory. They wanted to go back to their villages, work the land, and take care of their families, not die for the ambitions of the emperor and his foreign allies. With Nicholas away at the military headquarters, Alexandra began to receive ministers and bombard her husband with advice from our friend about whom to promote and whom to fire. In her opinion, Rasputin's foes should not be in chief military and ministerial positions. In her letters to the headquarters, the Empress urged Nicholas to be strong. "All my trust lies in our friend who only thinks of you, baby, and Russia. Guided by him, we shall get through this heavy time." Government officials wanted to know, how was the empire supposed to function when in 1 year only the Empress had a total of 12 ministers fired? Unaware of the heir's fatal condition, the extended Romanov family became convinced that Alexandra had gone mad. Why else would she be involved with the Siberian peasant? Rasputin needed to be removed. They tried to broach the subject with the Empress, but she refused to listen. Even Alexandra's sister Elizabeth could not persuade her to send Rasputin back to Siberia. On hearing about the holy man's scandalous antics, Alexandra only replied, "We know that saints had been slandered before." Everyone felt that the monarchs had betrayed Russia, and Nicholas's own kin decided to save the empire from Rasputin's evil influence. In December 1916, Rasputin was shot to death at the palace of Felix Yusupov, a prince who was married to Nicholas's niece. On hearing the news about the devil's demise, people hugged and drank champagne to toast their new heroes, Felix and his co-conspirator, Grand Duke Dmitri, Nicholas's beloved cousin. Felix would later publish his blockbuster memoirs and allege that to kill a devil like Rasputin, he and his accomplices had to first poison him, then shoot him, and finally drown him. That's how powerful the devil was. My friends, don't believe a word of this fictitious tale. Felix had a vivid imagination and was prone to theatrics. But in the end, he was nothing but a cowardly, cold-blooded killer. The autopsy showed that Rasputin died from 3 gunshot wounds. But why listen to the truth when the lie is so juicy? Felix's fable had been repeated so many times, it became a fact. Emperor Nicholas's lover from his yonder years, ballerina Matilda Kshisinska, summed up this situation better than anyone else. When killing Rasputin, the murderers killed the Empress's last hope for the survival of her son. And that was the most cruel and heinous thing about that crime. It was from that fatal moment that things began to unravel toward their tragic end. And did they unravel? Rasputin warned Alexandra that if he were to be killed, the imperial family and Russia would follow him to his grave. The Romanov family ridiculed the Empress for taking Grigory's words as gospel truth. Monarchies did not collapse when a lowly peasant died. If they only knew how true that prophecy would turn out to be. While the nobles celebrated the death of the imaginary devil, the real one was about to take over the Russian Empire. He was the leader of the Bolshevik Revolutionary Party, Vladimir Ulyanov, better known by his nickname, Lenin. Lenin had the imperial family arrested and sent to Siberia, where the 2 monarchs and their 5 children were assassinated by the Bolsheviks. Anastasia, the youngest daughter, was later rumored to have escaped. It was not true. The Bolsheviks were professional killers. There was no escape from their guns. After burning the victims' bodies, the killers buried the remaining skulls and bones. To hide this atrocity, communist propaganda immediately claimed that the royals had escaped. Rasputin was long dead and buried, but such was his amazing power that the new government decided to have him killed yet again. His body was exhumed, burned, chopped up, burned again, and then the ashes were scattered about the fields and covered with snow. And even that was not enough. Rasputin's name, the only vestige of him, was dragged through dirt and vilified. One Russian paper wrote with glee, "Come spring, water will wash away both the ashes and the dirt, and perhaps the vigorous shoots of new life will purge Rasputin's very name from memory." Had the publisher forgotten his Bible? For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. The whirlwind arrived as a bloody civil war that destroyed the empire and killed millions. Surviving Romanovs who had laughed at Grigory's prophecy grabbed their valuables and fled to their foreign villas. Away from the ruins where blood flowed like rivers and the air was heavy with smoke and the scent of death, where scores of innocent people and the imperial family and the Siberian elder had been reduced to dust. We still have the monarch's letters, passionate, loving, long missives, hundreds of them, and their diaries. Shortly after their wedding, Alexandra wrote in Nicholas's journal, 27th of November, 1894. No more separations. At last united, bound for life, And when this life is ended, we meet again in the other world to remain together for all eternity. Yours. Yours. Dear friends, this is Elena Pavlova, the author and producer of Royal Romances. Thank you for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this show, please give it great reviews, share it with others, and post about it on social media. Subscribe to learn about upcoming episodes, and listen to the Royal Romances podcast on all platforms. You can also visit www.royalromances.com for more stories and pictures. I look forward to hearing from you. Be well.